welcome to the Master Your Moment podcast. I am here with Elizabeth Mariah, and that is correct, right? Isn't how you say the Mariah or Maria?
Maria Minton is my
Maria.
last name. Uh-huh.
Okay, yeah. Okay. And today we're going to talk about self-discovery. So, Elizabeth, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, where you got to be where you are?
Yeah. So yes, I am a psychotherapist. So I have a private practice in Columbus, Ohio. And then I also run an online membership for self-care, which it sounds like you do as well.
Yes.
Yep. Focusing
Yeah.
on helping women go from feeling depleted, overwhelmed, and just down on themselves to feeling confident, inspired, and energized. Um, so those are the two areas that I work the most into my business, but I'm also certified as a forest bathing guide and as a Qigong teacher. So I do some other things too.
Yeah, that's so exciting. I'm like actually in the process of becoming adding a certification. I'm also a therapist, counselor, and that's kind of my background as well. But I'm in this course that's trauma-based, nature-based, expressive arts therapy. And so I'm going to go through a process to do all of that. And so that incorporates a lot of the nature and the arts and stuff. So that sounds really similar to kind of what
Yeah,
you do as well, or what you're interested in. So
absolutely.
that's really cool. Well, since we're talking about self-discovery, can you tell me, what do you think self-discovery means
Hmm.
to you?
Yeah. So I could answer this question in so many different ways. What comes up first for me is I think it's about moment to moment learning how to come back to ourselves because in really I think just we're on a journey, and discovery is a process that's very alive and organic in the moment. So I might have had this moment, this breakthrough, this self-discovery um chapter in my life, a decade ago, and that's going to look really different than what self-discovery is for me now. So I think of it as a journey toward reflection and openness in the moment to really come home to ourselves and be interested and curious about, what am I feeling? What's happening in my body? Um, what does this mean to me? Where do I want to go from here? So really a reflective process, moment to moment to moment.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you said that. It actually kind of reminds me of one of the activities that we're doing in this class. It's called a living journal. Have you ever heard of like a living
I
journal?
no, no. What is it?
Okay, so it was a really, really cool concept, but like we had to go in out and like collect different pieces of nature, and just so you had to bring in just different random things, and then you sort of like piece it together and create something, and then you use different words or phrases to write down like little sticky notes or something to say, this is kind of what I'm experiencing or seeing through this process. And my first living journal, I had these like two little pine cones, and they had these like different leaves or feathery things coming out from them, and they were sort of like touching one another, and so it was sort of this representation of like these two people coming together and just like sort of blooming and blossoming. And what you do with the living journal is you just change it, like you bring in new things or you take in other things and you just adapt it and make it grow and change. And it just was a really, really cool concept.
I love that.
Isn't that
Yes.
really cool?
Yes. So cool.
Okay, so why do you think that self-discovery is important?
Mm. So I think I mean, a lot of times we do go through our lives kind of with this. I think of it as like almost like filling the vehicle ourselves with this unconscious fuel. Just like, like we have patterned ways of being, we act out of those patterns. Most of them are unconscious, which is
Yeah.
efficient. We don't have to think about it, right? And there are also a lot of times that when we operate that way, we don't perceive choice. And so I think one of the most important parts for me and my work and in my life of self-discovery is the ability to recognize like, okay, so I could do what I do. I could do what I've always done. I could tell myself the story I've always told myself about this, right? Or about them or whatever it is.
Mhm.
Or I can make a different choice. I might still choose the pattern that I'm familiar with. That's to me, that's not as important as the ability to recognize that I have a choice. So this time I might choose that, and another time I might choose something else. And so I have freedom. And I also have a different sense of power, right? When there's that sense of self-discovery. So for me, helping other people on their self-discovery journeys is such an important process of allowing there to be freedom, empowerment, choice, where otherwise we're just kind of locked into the ways that we know and life as we have understood it to be. And so we don't have that option to choose something different if we want to.
Yeah, it's like trying to be intentional, right? Like
Yes.
about making that choice and decision to like, oh, there's actually different options about how I could go about this,
Yes,
right?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, can you share a personal experience about something that you discovered that was important for yourself in your self-discovery journey?
Oh, sure. Oh gosh, the many. Let's see. One that's been more recent that I've talked some about with the people that I work with and in my community and in my family as well, because it's been so transformational, is that I believe that it's great. It's a great idea for therapists to go to therapy. And so we don't work our stuff out on our clients, but then also because I think it's good for us to be in that client role and to know what that's like. And so I'm pretty dedicated as a client in therapy. But I also have noticed, and I ran into this because I was like working on great stuff and I was unpacking all kinds of, you know, new awarenesses. But I think for me, what I recognized is I wasn't really enhancing my presence the way I wanted to. There wasn't anything wrong with therapy. That wasn't therapy's fault. It's just that I wasn't bringing it into the in between sessions. And so I started this, I got certified in forest bathing, and then I went and learned Qigong. And I'll talk about Qigong for a second, because that was really powerful in a very specific way.
Yeah, I
So I
just
was,
noticed that you had posted something recently doing the Qigong method
yes.
and that was really, really cool.
Oh,
So I
thanks.
wanted to ask you more about that too, because I hear about like Tai Chi a lot, but you don't really hear about Qigong. Um, and I'm aware of it, but like it's not that familiar to me. So is there a difference between those two different practices, and what is that difference?
Yeah. So actually, Tai Chi is kind of like a child of Qigong. Qigong's older than Tai Chi, but they come from the same family. And so in Qigong is, I would say in general, it's simpler. There's flow in Qigong for sure. There's flows. And it's a lot more, I would say, in my experience, kind of distilled, like it's smaller movements or not as complicated of flows. And what I really appreciate about Qigong, and again, that's very connected to Tai Chi, but is that for me, it offered a way to slow myself down, and I love yoga as well. And one of the things that I practice yoga as well, but I think one of the things that I really appreciate about Qigong is that yoga tends to, there's a lot of folding, going up and then folding back down. And Qigong for me, is a very down grounding. You do upward motion, but then it's a lot of grounding down and synchronizing that with the breath. And for me, that was so helpful. And so that's one of the things that I really like about it. But it is a practice that then became or had the baby of Tai Chi, and Tai Chi took it from there.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I just think that's really cool. And I do think it kind of reflects into self-discovery because you have to there's a technique or practice that you really need to do sometimes and be creative about too that helps you with that self-discovery process. And when you can slow down and have that grounding, yeah, that can help you to open up and create that awareness of being able to reflect and have some self-discovery.
Yes. And with that journal idea that you talked about, I'm appreciating that also on some level, if you're holding those pine cones, there's a pause, right? Like, what does this mean to me? Like even just that offers that pause. And then it goes back into self-discovery and choice,
Yeah.
I think this is what's, coming up for me. Let me tap into that. Whereas before, it's just a pine cone, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And there's nothing wrong with that too. Like I could have simply just said like it's just a pine cone. But I also feel like you have a discovery process when you can look at something and find meaning out of something that it's just simply pine cone. You
Yeah.
know, it's
Yeah.
having a connection to things and creating that kind of awareness.
Yes.
Yeah. So okay, so you were finishing talking about your personal experience through what you had done with qigong. So what was your like sort of
Ah,
self-discovery through
my
that process?
self-discovery. Yeah. So what I learned through that process and really making it part of my daily routine is that I can have peace and safety anywhere. I always know, I mean, I'm safe, right? But sometimes we can
Right.
experience a rattle in ourselves, a stress response in our nervous system can cause us to not truly feel safe. We're just kind of jittery or anxious. And Qigong for me was this ability to kind of like come home and have peace. And that was the greatest gift of that moment of self-discovery is like, oh, I can have peace anytime, anywhere. I just have to breathe. I could just do, if I'm in a place where I can just do a little movement, bring myself back down, with a breath. I can access that anywhere. And so for me, it's so simple, but I did not have the discovery of my own access to peace, my own safety that I carry with me everywhere I go, that experience afforded me. And that was huge, like for me, like, oh my
That
gosh,
is.
there can be conflict happening and I can still breathe and find my way back to peace inside. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's super cool. So what do you think are most people's like barriers or obstacles on their journey of self-discovery?
Mm, that's such a good question. So what I notice are several things. One is that a lot of times people perceive that there's not enough time. And so it's like, oh, I don't have time to do this practice or this project, or there's a
Hmm.
perception that there's just not room for that in their lives. And I respond to that by saying like, yes, we are in a world where we are pulled in 1,000 different directions.
Hmm.
And we get to decide where we put our priorities, even if it's 2 minutes, even if it's five,
Yeah.
So I think time is a big barrier. Another barrier that I think can happen for people with self-discovery is sometimes fear. In my experience of like what they'll find out about themselves, like a fear that they're going to learn something that is um I don't know, maybe that they don't really that they'll learn that they're not as good as they hoped they were. Or they'll learn they're going to have some insecurity that they didn't really want to come in touch with, or they learn that they have a pain that they don't want to feel. And so I think a
Hmm.
lot of times numbing or distracting is a way to not be in that place of discovery. And what I often find is a way to work with people around that is like, yes, it's painful sometimes to tap into our sad, that sometimes can be there, or anger, whatever it is, it can sometimes be there. You meditate and all kinds of things can come up. It's not always peace in that moment, right? But as you learn that you can move through those feelings, they don't have the power. They don't, they're powerful in that moment, but they don't have the control over your life to constantly be in a distracted and avoidance pattern. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So those are
That's
some
a
of the
really
barriers,
good,
time and avoidance, I would say. Hmm.
yeah, and that's a good way to like, shift your focus, you know, like when you're trying to do that. Um, so how would somebody start a self-discovery process or a journey?
Yeah, that's great. So a real simple way to start would be to do little tiny check-ins. So this might be like, okay, here's an example. I might notice that I have tension in my shoulders, right? Like I just noticed that I have tension in my shoulders and I carry around this tension. So I might get curious about it. Like, huh, interesting. Like what's happening that is causing this tension? And then I might check in with my shoulders and find out that, oh, I'm holding my breath and my shoulders are like up to my earlobes. And then just gently invite myself to bring my shoulders down. As I'm getting interested in noticing more and more and more of these little check-ins, like what's happening in my shoulders? Am I holding my breath? I might start noticing what are the circumstances that are happening when I do that? Who am I
Mhm.
with? What space am I in? What time of day is it? And that might then start unpeeling the onion, right? Of like, oh,
Yeah.
maybe I don't feel comfortable in this particular, maybe there's a boundary that's kind of getting hit here, whatever it is, right? But I think sometimes those little check-ins, the body is a great place to start because it gives us all kinds of information that we don't otherwise pay attention to. And just notice breath and a place you're holding tension in your body, and then just get curious about it.
Yeah. I think I noticed when I looked at your website that you have a strong, like, mind, body, soul kind of connection. But I think that that process is really important in our self-discovery because yes, there's sort of like different dynamics, but they're all like really interconnected. Don't you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what I tell people is like a lot of times by the time we're thinking about it, like by the time we're actually having conscious awareness, like, man, I'm stressed. We are so stressed. Like there's all kinds of signs before that, right? That we're getting stressed that we could attend to, and that stress could just go down. But if we just rely on what we're thinking in that moment, we have to get to a certain threshold before that's conscious. So I really think that body part is just checking in with your body, checking in with your breath. It's a great place to start.
Right. And I feel like when you can create a practice of that, it helps you to be able to like acknowledge that stress when you see it more clearly and you can like do something about it before you feel like really frantic and anxious and right.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And also, actually, that goes back to me also to the barrier, because a lot of times what people will do is that they'll notice, like, oh, I'm stressed. And then they'll be like, why? Or like get mad at themselves. Like, why am I so stressed? Like, what's my problem? And so the other part of that I think is also so valuable is to notice it with compassion, like, oh, interesting. Or
Hmm.
even just in open minds, like curious, huh?
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm feeling this way, but I am feeling this way. So there must be some reason somewhere, so just allowing that compassion and that
Right.
response.
And acknowledging it, sitting with it for a little
Yes.
while.
Yes.
Excuse me. Okay. So, how does self-discovery lead you to master your moment?
Mm. So I think for me, that's a great question. I think for me, it comes back to that element of choice and freedom. Because if I have learned about myself, I've been interested, I've been curious, and I am unpeeling that onion, then I have empowerment where I can have mastery, right? We're always learning. It's not that this
Yeah.
learning process is ever finished, right? And there can be a sense of like, oh, I get to choose. I get to have mastery in the sense that I get to choose to come right back and take a deep breath. I get to choose to do something that really replenishes me or feels good to me or is aligned with my values, right? I don't have to be acting out of the shoulds all the time, or the ways I think I'm supposed to be, or whatever it is that the rat race that I'm running. I get to make my choices. So I think for me that there is mastery of the moment, of exactly how am I wanting to be in this time.
Yeah. And we talked about a little bit about some tools and techniques, your qigong, but what are some other like tools or techniques besides like qigong and just coming to the moment and breathing? What are some other tools that you find have been helpful?
Yeah, to come back to the moment
Well, for self-discovery,
or
what tools
self-discovery. Yeah.
and techniques would you need,
Yeah.
to uncover that?
Yeah. So I think oh goodness, there's so much. I think that if you're somebody who likes to write, then journaling, but allowing the journal to kind of be a dump, like a brain dump, like just kind of letting yourself know. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't even have to be coherent necessarily. Just really allowing yourself to brain dump, and then things will probably start to get clearer for you. That's one way. I think allowing yourself to pause, even if it's just a little pause, to just kind of check in. And that can be, if before you respond to somebody, that could be before you decide a yes or a no to an invitation or an ask. But I think sometimes these pauses can give us a moment to check in, and that can help us discover, where am I right now? And then, excuse me, if you're not somebody who's writing, but you are somebody who could pick up you don't have to be an artist, like pick up a crayon, pick up
Yeah.
markers, right? Just to be able to like use creativity is amazing. Like to use creative outlet to just see what's there, see what shows up. And then the last thing that I'll mention as well is sometimes walking. There's a lot to it. There's walking outside we can open up our vision, and so that relaxes our nervous system if we're not tunnel visioning. There's a bilateral stimulation piece, left, right, left, right, left, right, with a walking that can help soothe. And that space can just naturally create the pause for us to check in and just notice what's happening for me right now. But I think being able to also ask that question with an openness, not having to figure it out right that second, but just to stay with the question, what's happening for me right now? And just notice if something emerges. Notice if nothing emerges, because it could be that we don't know. And that's what is happening right now, is we're not sure. And just being with the unknown of that can be hard, but powerful.
Yeah. I think sometimes when we just silence the thoughts that run through our minds can help us to be more aware of like what that thought is and really thinking about, oh, that's what I'm thinking right now. And then making, like you said, like making that choice. Do I want to think like this right now? Because sometimes I'll have a thought in my head, and I'm like, where did that come from? I That's not me. I don't want to think like that. That's not my personality, and having that pause can help you shift that, change it so that you can, think differently, or even just let that thought go and be like, well, that was an oops thought, and I'm not gonna go down that road again, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And the other thing is, if we notice, and I think this is so powerful as well, I love what you're saying. Like if we notice that we're telling a story about somebody else, like we're really like, I would just invite us to check back in and see, is there any element of that story, if we change it to
Yeah.
they or he or she or whatever, if we come back to there was this exercise that I did one time in a training program where we were given a picture. It was just a random picture, and we had to write a story. We had partners, and we had to write a story real quick. We were given like, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes just to like quickly jot down a story. And then after we got jotted down our stories about the same picture, we read our stories to the partner, but with a caveat that my picture had a little girl in it, that every time we wrote she or named the girl or whatever, we had to say I, and read the story that we wrote about this random girl and see if we said I for every time we were referring to the girl, does it make sense? And every single time it did. So a lot of times, yeah,
Wow.
it was such a cool exercise. So a lot of times
That's a really
those,
powerful exercise.
oh, amazing. So a lot of times those stories that we're telling ourselves about some situation or somebody, that there are other opportunities for self-discovery. What part of this might be true in me? And can I
Right.
be
Yeah.
compassionate with myself around this?
Yeah. I mean, I can find sometimes even when I'm just like watching TV or something, and I'll like be disgusted by something, and I'll just think like, oh, why did they act that way, or why did they do that? And then I catch myself, I'm like, quit being so judgmental. Like, you don't know what the full situation might be or what the scenario. I mean, even if I think I know or whatever, you know, I try not to place those judgments and come from a different place of like, okay, well, this may be why they were experiencing that or whatever, instead of trying to place that judgment. But like sometimes even just watching TV, I'll come into mind like, wait a minute, that's not how you should be thinking about it. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's it's important, I think, to have an awareness of like your thoughts and your mind, and you can only do that by like having a practice and slowing down some,
Yes.
right?
Yes. And just
Exactly.
being interested in yourself, like what's interesting, like what was going on for me right there?
Yes, exactly. So do you think that there's any like misconceptions that people have about self-discovery?
Hmm. Yeah. I think that sometimes people will think of self-discovery, at least I've heard this, as kind of like navel gazing, like being very self-centered or interested in themselves, um and it being kind of selfish, honestly, or that's one, or that like it's overthinking. It doesn't really matter. Like, why are you putting so like kind of like judgment around like, oh my gosh, like you're reading way too much into that. That's, it's nothing. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes there can be some misconceptions that either it is self-centered or that it is or selfish or that it is like a overdoing it, overthinking, making a mountain out of a molehill, that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of judgment that can come around self-discovery. Um,
Yeah.
and then the other thing that I think is sometimes there can be a little bit of arrogance with self-discovery. Like sometimes people can feel like they're just like have arrived in like all-knowing awareness,
Mhm.
and we are, and my perception of that is like, we're always learning all the time. We're alive, which means we're learning, and so I don't think
Right.
that we're better than anybody else. We're just in our process and our journey.
Yeah, exactly. And because, I think that you and I resonate with this a lot too, is the fact that we consider self-discovery a journey. And you're always going to go through that self-discovery process. It's not just like I'm going to self-discovery and know exactly what I want out of my life and out of my situation for the rest of my life. I've solved the puzzle. I've solved it. I know exactly what to do.
Mhm.
Like that's not realistic. That doesn't exist. You're going to be constantly changing and discovering new things about yourself because you are going to be going through different experiences, you
Yes.
know?
Yes. Yeah. And rather than, I mean, I know that sometimes that can feel defeating to people, but to me, you're going to be in a different place in your journey. Like you're growing and learning and feeling hopefully more alive, hopefully more
Yeah.
vibrant. And so there's as you're learning new things and on that journey, it just gets richer and richer and richer in my experience.
Yeah. So what would you tell somebody if they're like, I'm not going to do that because that's being selfish and I shouldn't learn about myself because then I'm going to become arrogant if I do that.
Mhm.
What would you say to them?
Yeah. So I think what I would say is that when I think of selfishness, I think of somebody who really um, does not actually have a sense of self that's very strong. And so they're constantly trying to fill it, right? Like they're kind of hustling to like fill it and not really being considerate of other people versus having a self and replenishing and caring for that self, which gives us so much more energy so that we can share it, so share ourselves so much more heartfelt and in ways that are so much more present. And so actually, I think sort of ironically or paradoxically, by taking the time to take care of yourself, you are able to show up so much more for your community, for your family, for your loved ones. And so I really see it as the opposite of selfish, which is,
Yeah.
more, I think it's completely different. And then the other piece you mentioned about, um, oh, that I'll be arrogant. Again, it kind of speaks to the same message around like actually in a lot of ways when we unpeel the onion and we're getting more and more um, more attentive and more present, we tend to be, if that's genuinely happening, we tend to be more humble, right? Because
Yeah,
we're just
exactly.
yes, we're aware that it's a journey. We're aware that when, what is the arrival? We're here to learn and be, right?
Mhm. Because the self-discovery process is not just about like learning your um like strengths or things that bring you joy. It can also be like when you were talking about the fear and the discovery of maybe some of those weaknesses that you don't want to really know, that you didn't really want to talk about, but that are still really important because they can still make up who you are. And when you're aware of those weaknesses, you can know how to show up best in your strengths just because you are aware of those weaknesses.
Absolutely. And then also, I mean, from my biggest stumbling places in my life, my biggest struggles, my biggest like moments where I realized, oh my goodness, I'm waking up and I have been asleep, to whatever this is. Um, I have so much compassion for the people in the same boat. and I can offer myself, my presence, my compassion, my, oh my gosh, I've been there, my non-judgment, like, girlfriend, like I know, and so it opens up that connection to be aware, to touch those places that are so hard, and then to like overcome, to come through, and then be there for the people who are in a different place in their journey, that's very familiar. So
Yeah. To be able to like know yourself well enough that you can walk that journey with another person.
yeah.
That's really, really awesome. So, how do you think that you can continue this journey as a lifelong process? We've kind of
Mm.
already talked a little bit about that, but
Yeah, I think that I see a lot of like self-discovery practices and finding those good fits for you. It might not be one, it could be, all kinds of different practices that offer an opening for you to be more present to and with yourself. I think that continuing to engage in those practices and really integrating them into life. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to go to this retreat for a week, which is lovely if you could do that, like cool, and not really sustainable and on a daily basis or in your life. It's I
yeah,
think bringing those practices and integrating them into ways of being, ways of living, it makes it so much more fluid and easy to just have self-discovery be part of your life, just like breathing, just like your heart beating. It's
yeah, exactly. I have a membership program where I have like it's 6 self-care practices that we do, and there it master your moment. Moment stands for the 6 practices, and it's meditation, observation, monograph, exercise, nurturing your mind, and testimony. So, doing meditation, visualizing what you want for yourself, I think that can be a really great tool in the self discovery process. Nurturing your mind by learning about different things and having different experiences, exercising because you need that mind body connection that we talked about. Testimony are those like affirmations, and saying affirmations can help you decide, like, okay, this is how I want to be,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
So those are all of the tools that I use in my toolbox, and I try to do them on a daily basis, but they are ones that I don't do like I'm not doing each one for an hour long. I'm spending, 5 to 10 minutes on one, 5 to 10 minutes on another. And then monograph was the journaling aspect that you had talked about to do as well. So those are really great practices that I do. Do you have any other books, resources, or other recommended practices for people?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think I think anything by Brene Brown is great. But she had The Gifts of Imperfection is a book that she wrote, and she talks a lot about creativity in that book, about kind of allowing yourself to open into that space. And so I think you kind of touch on this and what you're talking about, but I think anything creative is can be so helpful. I had somebody, this is not a book, but this is somebody that I am, one of my colleagues that I really appreciate. She talks a lot about ritual and how kind of like the pine cone, concept, like if we can have little rituals that maybe it's a little, like maybe it's something where you go outside and you find something that, is symbolic for you, and you bring it into your space, and you just are kind of like noticing what that means to you, and it might change, right? Or I think a practice of, I think going outside is really beneficial,
Yeah, yeah,
both for just grounding, but then also there's a lot of research about the impact of the NK fighter cells, which is like our immunity cells in trees, that can really boost our immunity. And so I think getting outside and just doing any kind of walking, hiking, meditating, anything like that is really awesome. Um, those would be and then I think for me, breath work is awesome.
yeah,
And so there's all different kinds of really simple breathing techniques that can either calm your nervous system or bring your energy to your body.
yeah.
And so I think breath work is amazing, which can go along with meditation. And oh my gosh, there's so much I could say here.
I know, right?
Yeah, I could keep going. Uh-huh.
Okay, well, I thank you and appreciate you so much for coming on the show today. Can you share with us like your where where people can find you and that kind of
Oh
thing?
yeah, sure. So for anybody listening that's in Columbus, I have a private practice in Columbus called Reflections Counseling Center of Columbus. And then online I do the a membership as well. And that's at the www.thecalmingground.com. I have a podcast, the Calming Ground podcast. You can find me there. So those would be the three places that I'm most easily found. I'm also on Facebook with the Calming Ground and on Instagram.
Okay, yeah, and I'll link those in the description when I put this out there. So
Awesome.
thank
Cool.
you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's great talking with you.